Hello, everyone. In the second lecture of this chapter, we have studied about receptors and sense organs. We had talked about sensory organs in detail. Then we have talked about external and internal receptors, and at last section, we have talked about the muscles as effectors. So we will continue from glands as effectors, so let's get started. Now let's talk about the glands. There are mainly two types of glands, named ducted and ductless. The primary distinction between ducted, exocrine, and ductless, endocrine, glands lies in the presence or absence of ducts and the mode of secretion. Exocrine glands release their products through ducts to external or internal body surfaces, while endocrine glands secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream for widespread systemic effects. Now let's talk about each of them. First of all, the ducted glands. Exocrine glands have ducts, which are tubular structures, to carry their secretions to specific locations. They release their secretions externally or into body cavities, including the skin or the digestive tract. Exocrine glands often play a role in digestion, thermoregulation, lubrication, and protection of the skin. Examples: sweat glands, salivary glands, sebaceous glands, and mammary glands are examples of exocrine glands. Now let's talk about ductless or endocrine glands. Endocrine glands lack ducts and release their secretions directly into the bloodstream. Hormones produced by endocrine glands travel through the bloodstream to target organs and tissues throughout the body. Endocrine glands regulate various physiological processes, including metabolism, growth, reproduction, and responses to stress. Examples include pituitary gland, thyroid gland, adrenal glands, and pancreas are examples of endocrine glands. Here is some key areas of physiological influence of glands on body. Number 1, regulating internal environment. Glands are effectors that play a crucial role in maintaining homeostasis by regulating the internal environment. Number 2, the hormonal release. The nervous system, particularly the endocrine system, influences glandular activity. Glands release hormones into the bloodstream in response to specific stimuli or commands from the nervous system. Number 3, physiological responses. Hormones act on target cells, initiating physiological responses. For example, the adrenal glands release adrenaline in response to stress, preparing the body for the fight or flight response. Number 4, autonomic regulation. Certain glands, such as salivary glands or sweat glands, respond to autonomic nervous system commands without conscious control. This can lead to responses like salivation or sweating in specific situations. Let's talk about integration of muscles and glands. Number 1, the coordinated responses. Muscles and glands often work together in coordinated responses. For instance, the perception of danger might trigger both muscular actions, that is running away, and glandular responses, that is increased sweating. Number 2, emotional expression. Muscles of the face are effectors in expressing emotions, while glands, influenced by the autonomic system, contribute to emotional responses such as blushing. Number 3, feedback mechanisms. Sensory feedback. Muscles and glands receive sensory feedback, enabling adjustments in their activity. For example, stretch receptors in muscles provide feedback on muscle length, contributing to coordinated movements. Number 4, regulation of hormones. Glands often operate under feedback loops. For instance, the endocrine system adjusts hormone release based on the body's needs, with feedback mechanisms regulating hormone levels. In summary, muscles and glands serve as effectors in translating sensory perceptions into behavior. The nervous system's coordination of these effectors allows for purposeful movements, emotional expressions, and physiological adaptations, contributing to the dynamic interplay between perception and behavior. Now let's talk about the connectors, those who integrates the receptors and the effectors in order to perform various physical activities. First of all, the neurons. Neurons are the fundamental building blocks of the nervous system, serving as the primary functional units that transmit and process information. These specialized cells play a crucial role in the communication network of the brain and the entire nervous system. Here's an overview of neurons. First of all, the structure. Number 1, cell body. It contains the nucleus and essential cellular organelles. The cell body integrates incoming signals. Then, the dendrites. These are the branch-like extensions that receive signals from other neurons or sensory receptors. Number 3, axon, a long, slender projection that carries nerve impulses away from the cell body. Axon terminals, specialized endings that transmit signals to other neurons or target cells. Function of the neurons. Number 1, transmission of signals. Neurons transmit electrical signals, known as action potentials or nerve impulses, from one part of the cell to another. Number 2, communication. Neurons communicate with each other through synapses, which are junctions, where signals pass from the axon terminals of one neuron to the dendrites or cell body of another. Now let's talk about the types of neurons. Number 1, sensory neurons. It transmits sensory information from sensory organs to the central nervous system. Number 2, motor neurons. Convey signals from the CNS to muscles or glands, influencing movement or secretion. Number 3, interneurons, or the associative neurons. These are located within the CNS. These neurons facilitate communication between sensory and motor neurons. Now the myelin sheath. Function. Some neurons are surrounded by a myelin sheath, an insulating layer that speeds up the conduction of nerve impulses, nodes of Ranvier, gaps in the myelin sheath where action potentials are regenerated. Now let's talk about the neural impulse. Neural impulse, also known as an action potential, is an electrical signal that travels along the membrane of a neuron, allowing for the transmission of information within the nervous system. This process is crucial for communication between neurons and the initiation of various physiological responses. Here is a detailed overview about neural impulse. Number 1, resting state. Neurons maintain a resting membrane potential with a negative charge inside the cell compared to the outside. This polarization is maintained by the active transport of ions across the cell membrane through ion channels, such as the sodium-potassium pump. Number 2, initiation of action potential. When a neuron is stimulated, ion channels open, allowing positive sodium ions to flow into the cell, depolarizing the membrane. If the depolarization reaches a certain threshold, it triggers the initiation of an action potential. Number 3, depolarization. The threshold is the minimum level of depolarization required to generate an action potential. Sodium ion channels open rapidly, allowing an influx of sodium ions into the cell, reversing the charge across the membrane. Number 4, repolarization. After reaching its peak, the action potential triggers the opening of potassium ion channels. Potassium ions move out of the cell, restoring the negative charge inside the neuron and repolarizing the membrane. Number 4, hyperpolarization. In some cases, the membrane potential briefly becomes more negative than the resting state. This hyperpolarization is due to delayed closure of potassium channels. Number 5, refractory period. Following an action potential, there is a refractory period during which the neuron is less responsive to additional stimuli. This period ensures that action potentials travel in one direction along the axon. Number 6, propagation of action potential. The action potential travels along the axon of the neuron toward the axon terminals. This propagation is achieved through the sequential opening and closing of voltage-gated ion channels. Number 7, saltatory conduction. In myelinated neurons, action potentials jump between nodes of Ranvier, speeding up the conduction of nerve impulses. Saltatory conduction conserves energy and allows for faster transmission of signals. Number 8, synaptic transmission. At the axon terminals, the action potential triggers the release of neurotransmitters into the synapse. Neurotransmitters bind to receptors on the postsynaptic neuron, initiating a new action potential or inhibiting further signals. The neural impulse is a dynamic and precisely regulated process that forms the basis of communication within the nervous system. The ability of neurons to generate and transmit action potentials is responsible for various cognitive functions, sensory perception, and motor control.